The morning sun had just begun to cast long shadows across the cracked concrete of the driveway when he first saw it. Not the sun, but the bike, his bike. It stood there leaning against the weathered garage wall, its red frame gleaming even in the soft dawn light. For 17-year-old Alex, this bicycle wasn't just metal and rubber. It was freedom. It was pride. It was 2 years of saving every dollar from his after-school job at the neighborhood grocery store. He ran his fingers along the smooth handlebars, feeling the familiar texture of the grip tape beneath his fingertips. The bike had been his obsession since he was 14, when he'd first seen one just like it in a magazine at the dentist's office. While other kids flipped through sports or gaming magazines, Alex had memorized every specification, every curve, every feature of that mountain bike. He'd torn out the page and tacked it to his bedroom wall, where it remained, slightly yellowed with time, as a constant reminder of his goal. Working at the grocery store hadn't been glamorous. Bagging groceries, collecting carts from the parking lot, cleaning up spills in aisle 7. It was tedious work that left his hands smelling of plastic and his clothes carrying the faint scent of produce. But every paycheck brought him closer to his dream. His manager, a kind woman with graying hair and tired eyes, had noticed how carefully he saved his money and sometimes gave him extra hours when other teenagers called in sick. "Smart boy," she'd say, watching him count his tips. "You're planning for something important." Alex would just nod and smile, too private to explain that his something important was a bicycle that cost more than some people's monthly rent. His mother didn't understand either, not really. She saw it as an extravagance they couldn't afford. "Why do you need such an expensive bike?" she'd ask, her brow furrowed with worry lines that seemed to deepen each year. "The old one works fine, doesn't it?" The old bike was a hand-me-down from his cousin, heavy and awkward with gears that sometimes slipped and brakes that worked only when they felt like it. But Alex never complained about it. Instead, he'd just say, "This one will last longer, Mom. It's an investment." That word, investment, made it sound practical, responsible, something a future-minded teenager would purchase. But the truth was, Alex wanted this bike because it was beautiful. Because when he rode it, he felt like he was flying. Because in a life that often felt out of his control, this was something he could choose, something he could earn, something that would be his and his alone. Now, standing in the driveway with the morning air still cool against his skin, Alex felt that familiar surge of pride. He'd bought the bike 3 months ago, using every dollar he'd saved plus a small bonus from his manager when he'd worked through Thanksgiving weekend. The day he'd brought it home, he'd spent 3 hours just cleaning it, polishing every surface until it shone. He swung his leg over the frame, feeling the comfortable fit of the bike beneath him. It was like an extension of his body, perfectly sized to his measurements. The seat was worn just enough to mold to his shape, the handlebars positioned exactly where his hands naturally wanted to rest. He didn't ride it yet, just sat there feeling the balance. The potential energy coiled in the frame and suspension. From the kitchen window, he could see his mother moving around, her silhouette dark against the bright overhead lights. She was probably making his breakfast before heading to her first job at the nursing home. She worked there from 7 to 3, then had a 2-hour break before starting her evening shift at the hotel front desk, where she'd work until 11. Some days she picked up extra hours cleaning offices early in the morning before the sun came up. Alex felt a familiar pang of guilt as he watched her silhouette. He knew how hard she worked, how tired she always was. Sometimes, when he came home late from the grocery store, he'd find her asleep in her armchair, still wearing her work clothes, the TV flickering silently in the darkened living room. On those nights, he would gently cover her with a blanket and turn off the television, his heart aching with a mixture of love and helplessness. His father had left when Alex was 10, not with a dramatic fight or tears, but with a quiet conversation in a packed suitcase while Alex was at school. When he'd come home that day, his mother had been sitting at the kitchen table, her eyes red but dry. "Your dad needed to find himself," she'd said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Sometimes people need to do that." Alex had nodded, not fully understanding but recognizing the finality in her tone. He never saw his father again, except in photographs that gradually disappeared from the walls and shelves, packed away in boxes his mother stored in the attic. In the 7 years since, their life had settled into a routine of work and school, of careful budgeting and occasional treats when they could afford them. His mother never complained, never spoke of her own dreams or desires. Her focus was entirely on Alex, on his education, his future, his happiness. "You're going to college," she'd say repeatedly during his junior year. "Don't worry about the money. We'll figure it out." But Alex worried. He saw the notices from the bank, the carefully organized bills on her desk, the way she skipped meals sometimes, claiming she wasn't hungry. He knew how much she sacrificed, how little she kept for herself. That's why he'd never told her the real price of the bike. When she'd asked, he'd downplayed it by almost half, watching her expression relax from concern to reluctant acceptance. "As long as you're saving for college too," she'd said, and he'd nodded, feeling the weight of the lie settle in his stomach. The truth was, he had been saving for college, but the bike had taken most of his college fund. He justified it by telling himself he could earn more money, that he had time before college applications were due, that he deserved something nice after working so hard. Now, as he finally pushed off from the driveway and began to ride down the quiet suburban street, Alex pushed those thoughts away. The bike responded to his movements with an almost supernatural intuition, gliding over the uneven pavement with ease. He shifted gears automatically, the chain moving smoothly from one cog to another without the clunky hesitation of his old bike. The morning air filled his lungs, cool and fresh. He passed houses with their neat lawns and colorful flower beds, the sprinklers just beginning to spray arcs of water across the grass. A newspaper delivery car slowed as he approached, the driver giving him a friendly wave. Alex waved back, feeling the familiar sense of freedom that always came with riding his bike. He didn't have a destination in mind. That was the point. On his bike, he could go anywhere, be anyone. The weight of school assignments, the worry about his mother's health, the uncertainty about his future, all of it faded away when he was riding. There was only the rhythm of his pedaling, the whir of the chain, the wind against his face. He turned onto a path that led into the small patch of woods at the edge of their neighborhood. The trail was narrow and winding, with roots and rocks that made it challenging. Alex stood up on the pedals, his body moving in sync with the bike as they navigated the difficult terrain. His heart pounded with exertion and excitement, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning air. This was where the bike truly shined, on the rough trails where lesser bicycles would struggle. The suspension absorbed the impact of each rock and root, keeping the tires in contact with the ground. The responsive brakes allowed him to control his speed on steep descents, taking corners with confidence that he'd never had on his old bike. He emerged from the woods into a clearing that overlooked the valley below. The town spread out like a map, with the morning sun glinting off windows and water towers. Alex stopped, breathing heavily, his legs trembling slightly from the exertion. He leaned the bike against a tree and sat on a fallen log, pulling a water bottle from his backpack. As he drank, he thought about his mother. She would be leaving for work soon if she hadn't already. He imagined her moving through the quiet halls of the nursing home, greeting the residents with her gentle smile, helping them with their morning routines. She was good at her work, patient and kind in a way that seemed to come naturally to her. Sometimes Alex worried about how physically demanding her job was. He'd seen the strain in her back when she came home, the way she massaged her shoulders and wrists. She was getting older, though she never admitted it. At 48, she should have been thinking about slowing down, about taking care of herself. Instead, she worked harder than ever, determined to give Alex opportunities she'd never had. He finished his water and stood up, stretching his tired muscles. The bike gleamed in the sunlight, and he felt that familiar surge of pride mixed with something else. Guilt, maybe, or at least the awareness that this beautiful machine represented a choice he'd made, a priority he'd set that might not have been the most practical. But then he remembered how it felt to ride, the sense of possibility and freedom it gave him. In a life that often felt constrained by circumstances beyond his control, the bike was something that belonged entirely to him, something he'd earned through his own hard work. As he began the ride home, Alex pushed these thoughts away again. The sun was higher now, the neighborhood coming to life with cars pulling out of driveways and people walking their dogs. He rode carefully through the streets, savoring these last moments of freedom before the day's responsibilities began. When he arrived home, the house was quiet. His mother had already left for work, but she'd left his breakfast on the kitchen counter, eggs and toast with a glass of orange juice. There was a note next to the plate in her neat handwriting. "Have a good day at school. Love you, Mom." Alex ate quickly, his mind already on the day ahead. Classes, then work at the grocery store from 4 to 8. As he cleaned his plate, he glanced out the window at the bike, now parked in its usual spot against the garage wall. It looked beautiful there, a splash of vibrant red against the weathered gray of the building. He felt a pang of something. Anticipation? Apprehension? As he looked at it. Today was special. After school, he was meeting some friends from the cycling club to ride on the mountain trails outside of town. It would be the first time he'd taken the bike on really challenging terrain, and he was both excited and nervous. But there was something else too, a feeling he couldn't quite name or shake. As he stood there, looking at the bike that represented so many of his dreams and desires, he had no way of knowing that this ordinary morning would be the last time he looked at his beloved bicycle, without the weight of a terrible decision pressing down on him. He had no way of knowing that by the end of the week, this symbol of freedom and independence would become the key to his mother's survival. For now, he was just a 17-year-old boy with a beautiful bike and a day of ordinary responsibilities ahead of him. He grabbed his backpack, gave the bike one last admiring glance, and headed out the door to catch the school bus, unaware that his life was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. The school day crawled by at a snail's pace. Alex sat in his chemistry class watching the clock's second hand make its slow, deliberate journey around the dial. The teacher was talking about molecules and bonds, but Alex's mind was elsewhere. On the trails waiting for him after school, on the feel of the wind against his face, on the satisfying crunch of tires on dirt and gravel. He doodled a bicycle in the margin of his notebook, adding careful details to the frame and gears, his pen moving with practiced ease. When the final bell rang, Alex was the first one out the door. He grabbed his backpack from his locker and jogged to the bus stop, his heart already beating a little faster with anticipation. The bus ride home felt longer than usual, each stoplight and passenger delay a small torture. He bounced his knee impatiently, watching the familiar neighborhoods pass by through the smudged window. Finally, the bus reached his stop. Alex practically ran the remaining 2 blocks to his house, dropping his backpack inside the door and heading straight for the garage. The bike was still there, gleaming in the afternoon light. He ran his hand along the frame, feeling the smooth, cool metal beneath his fingers. It was perfect. He quickly changed into his riding clothes, padded shorts and a moisture-wicking shirt, and loaded the bike onto the rack he'd installed on the back of his mother's old car. The drive to the trailhead took 20 minutes, and Alex spent the whole time mentally preparing for the ride ahead. He'd been looking forward to this all week, a chance to really test the bike's capabilities on some challenging terrain. When he arrived, his friends were already there, 3 guys from the cycling club, all with expensive bikes and gear that made them look like professional athletes. They greeted him with enthusiastic waves and calls of his name. "About time you showed up," called Kevin, a lanky guy with a permanent grin. "Thought you might have chickened out." Alex laughed. "Not a chance. You guys ready to eat my dust?" They spent the next 3 hours riding the trails, pushing themselves and their bikes to the limit. Alex felt alive in a way he rarely did elsewhere, his body working in perfect harmony with the machine beneath him, his mind focused entirely on the present moment. They climbed steep hills, navigated technical descents, and flew along flat stretches of trail, the world blurring around them. By the time they finished, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. They were all exhausted but exhilarated, their faces flushed and their bodies covered in a fine layer of dust and sweat. "That was epic," said David, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his glove. "We should do this every weekend." Everyone agreed, making plans to meet again the following week. As they loaded their bikes onto their cars, Alex noticed his phone buzzing in his pocket. He pulled it out, expecting to see a message from his mother asking when he'd be home. Instead, he saw a series of missed calls from an unknown number followed by a text message. "Please call St. Mary's Hospital regarding your mother, Elena Rodriguez." Alex's blood ran cold. He fumbled with the phone, his fingers suddenly clumsy and uncooperative as he tried to dial the number. His friends noticed the change in his demeanor immediately. "Everything okay?" asked Kevin, his usual grin replaced by a look of concern. Alex shook his head, unable to speak as he listened to the phone ring. Finally, a voice answered on the other end. St. Mary's Hospital, how may I help you? This is Alex Rodriguez, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm returning a call about my mother, Elena. There was a brief pause, then the voice returned, softer this time. Alex, thank you for calling us back. I'm transferring you to Dr. Evans in the emergency department. The wait felt like an eternity, each second stretching into an hour. Alex could hear his friends talking in hushed tones nearby, could feel their concerned eyes on him, but his entire world had narrowed to the phone pressed against his ear. Alex, a new voice said. This is Dr. Evans. I'm sorry to tell you this, but your mother was brought to the emergency department about an hour ago. She collapsed at work. Alex's knees felt weak and he leaned against his car for support. Is she okay? The doctor hesitated, and in that moment of silence, Alex knew the answer was no. She's stable for now, but she had what we believe was a major cardiac event. A heart attack. We're running some tests to determine the extent of the damage. Alex felt like he couldn't breathe. His mother, his strong, resilient mother who worked 2 jobs, who never complained, who was always there for him, had a heart attack? It didn't seem possible. She was only 48. I'm on my way, he managed to say, his voice cracking. That's good, the doctor replied. When you arrive, come to the emergency department entrance and ask for me. I'll be waiting for you. Alex ended the call and stood there for a moment, trying to process what he'd just heard. His friends gathered around him, their expressions worried. What's wrong? Asked Kevin gently. Is it your mom? Alex nodded, unable to speak. He felt a hand on his shoulder. David's, he thought. Is there anything we can do? David asked. Alex shook his head. I need to get to the hospital. Can you get my bike home for me? Of course, said Kevin immediately. Just give us the keys. We'll drop it off at your house. Alex fumbled in his pocket for the car keys, his hands shaking so badly that he dropped them twice. Finally, he managed to press them into Kevin's hand. Call us if you need anything, said David, his voice serious. Anything at all. Alex nodded again, then got into his car. The drive to the hospital was a blur of streetlights and traffic, his mind racing with 1,000 terrible thoughts. He kept seeing his mother's face, her tired smile, the worry lines around her eyes, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was concentrating. He thought of all the times she'd worked through illness, all the times she'd put his needs before her own. Had he missed the signs? Should he have noticed that she wasn't feeling well? The hospital parking lot was brightly lit and surprisingly full for this time of evening. Alex found a spot near the emergency entrance and practically ran to the doors, his heart pounding with fear and adrenaline. The automatic doors slid open with a whoosh, revealing a busy waiting area filled with people in various states of distress and worry. He approached the desk, trying to keep his voice steady as he asked for Dr. Evans. The receptionist made a quick phone call, then pointed him toward a set of double doors. Through there, first door on your right. Alex pushed through the doors into a corridor that smelled of antiseptic and something else, something vaguely sweet and unsettling. He found the door the receptionist had indicated and knocked softly. Come in, called a voice. Alex entered to find a middle-aged woman in a white coat standing by a computer terminal. She turned as he came in, her expression kind but serious. Alex? She asked, extending her hand. I'm Dr. Evans. Thank you for coming so quickly. How is she? Alex asked, bypassing the handshake. How's my mom? Dr. Evans gestured to a chair. Please sit down. We need to talk. Alex sat, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, his knuckles white. Your mother had a major heart attack, the doctor began, her voice gentle but direct. The paramedics were able to restart her heart on the way to the hospital, which is good. But there's significant damage to her heart muscle, and she's not stable yet. Alex felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. Can I see her? In a moment, Dr. Evans said. There's something else we need to discuss first. Your mother needs surgery, specifically a coronary artery bypass graft. It's a procedure to restore blood flow to her heart muscle. Without it, her chances of survival are very low. Alex nodded, trying to absorb the information. Okay, when can you do the surgery? That's the complication, Dr. Evans said, her expression sympathetic. We need to do it as soon as possible, ideally within the next 48 hours. But there's an issue with insurance. Alex felt his stomach clench. What kind of issue? Your mother's insurance policy has a high deductible, the doctor explained. Before we can proceed with the surgery, the hospital requires payment of the deductible amount. It's $5,000. $5,000. The number echoed in Alex's mind, impossibly large. He had some savings, about $1,200 from what was left of his college fund after buying the bike. But 5,000? It might as well have been $1 million. I don't have that kind of money, Alex said, his voice barely audible. Is there anything you can do? Can't you just do the surgery and work out the payment later? Dr. Evans shook her head slowly. I wish I could, but hospital policy is very clear on this. We need the payment up front before we can schedule the surgery. I'm sorry. Alex felt tears welling up in his eyes, and he blinked them back angrily. Crying wouldn't help his mother. He needed to think, to figure something out. Can I see her now? He asked, his voice thick with emotion. Of course, the doctor said, standing up. She's sedated right now, so she won't be able to talk to you, but you can sit with her for a while. Dr. Evans led him through a maze of corridors to a small room with glass walls. Inside, his mother lay motionless on a bed, surrounded by machines that beeped and whirred softly. Tubes and wires connected her to various monitors and IV lines, and a ventilator helped her breathe. Alex stood in the doorway for a moment, overwhelmed by the sight of his usually vibrant mother so still and pale. This couldn't be happening. It was like some terrible nightmare that he couldn't wake up from. He approached the bed slowly, his eyes fixed on his mother's face. Even in her unconscious state, she looked worried, her brow furrowed as if she was still concerned about something or someone. Alex reached out and gently smoothed her hair back from her forehead, his fingers trembling. I'm here, Mom, he whispered, his voice cracking. Everything's going to be okay. But even as he said the words, he knew they weren't true. Everything wasn't going to be okay. Nothing was okay, and he had no idea how to make it right. He pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down, taking his mother's hand in his. It was cool and limp, nothing like the warm, strong hand he was used to holding. He watched the rhythmic rise and fall of her chest, assisted by the ventilator, and listened to the steady beep of the heart monitor. Each beep was both reassuring and terrifying, a sign that she was still alive, but also a reminder of how fragile that life had suddenly become. As he sat there, holding his mother's hand and watching her breathe, Alex's mind raced, trying to come up with a solution to the impossible problem he faced. $5,000. Where could he possibly get that kind of money in less than 48 hours? He thought about calling relatives, but there weren't many to call. His mother was an only child, and his grandparents had passed away years ago. His father's family had disappeared from their lives after the divorce, and even if he could track them down, he doubted they would help. He considered asking his friends, but they were all teenagers like him, working part-time jobs for minimum wage. None of them would have that kind of money, and even if they did, he couldn't bring himself to ask. What about a loan? He was too young to qualify for a personal loan, and even if he could, he had no way to pay it back. The same went for a credit card. He didn't have one, and again, no income to support the payments. As the minutes ticked by, Alex felt a growing sense of desperation. He looked at his mother's peaceful face, at the machines keeping her alive, and felt a wave of helplessness so powerful it almost brought him to his knees. He was just a kid. How was he supposed to solve a problem like this? It was then that his mind drifted back to the bike. His beautiful, perfect bike that represented so many of his dreams and desires. He remembered the pride he'd felt when he'd finally saved enough money to buy it, the freedom it gave him when he rode, the way it made him feel like anything was possible. He also remembered the man he'd met a few weeks ago at the local park, an older gentleman who had admired his bike and asked if he would ever consider selling it. At the time, Alex had laughed and said no, never. But the man had been persistent, leaving his phone number and saying, "If you ever change your mind, give me a call. I'll pay good money for a bike like that." Alex felt a pang of something, regret, apprehension, as he thought about that conversation. He pulled out his phone, his hand shaking as he searched through his contacts for the number the man had given him. When he found it, he stared at it for a long time, his thumb hovering over the call button. Could he really do it? Could he sell the one thing that brought him joy? The one thing he'd worked so hard to earn? The bike was his escape, his freedom, his pride. Selling it would feel like giving up a part of himself. But then he looked at his mother, at her pale face and the tubes and wires surrounding her, and he knew what he had to do. The bike was just a thing, metal and rubber and gears. His mother was everything. With a deep breath and a heart heavy with resignation, Alex pressed the call button and put the phone to his ear. knowing that he was about to make the most difficult decision of his young life. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Each ring echoed in the quiet hospital corridor, sounding impossibly loud to Alex's ears. He was standing just outside his mother's room, leaning against the cool wall for support. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic rhythm that seemed to match the beeping of the machines inside the room. Just as he was about to hang up, a voice answered, a bit breathless. "Hello?" Alex swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. "Hello, is this Mr. Henderson? We met at the park a few weeks ago. You were looking at my bike." There was a pause on the other end, then a warmer, more relaxed voice responded. "Oh, yes. The young man with the beautiful red mountain bike. I remember you. You said you weren't interested in selling. I hope you're not calling to tell me someone stole it." "No, nothing like that," Alex said quickly. I'm calling because I've changed my mind about selling it." He could hear the man's interest pick up immediately.
"Is that so?"
"Well, that's wonderful news. I'm still very interested. What made you change your mind?" Alex's eyes drifted to the window of his mother's room. He could see the steady rise and fall of her chest, the gentle beep of the monitor. "It's a family thing," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Something's come up and I need the money." "I understand," Mr. Henderson said, his tone sympathetic. "Life has a way of throwing curveballs at us. Are you free to meet tomorrow? We could discuss a price." "I was hoping to meet sooner," Alex said, the urgency in his voice unmistakable. "Much sooner. Like tonight if possible." There was another pause, longer this time. "Tonight? That's quite short notice. I have a dinner engagement." "It's really important," Alex interrupted, then immediately regretted his rudeness. "I'm sorry. It's an emergency." The man was quiet for a moment, and Alex worried he was going to say no. "An emergency, you say? All right then. Emergency it is. How about we meet in 2 hours? At the park where we first met?" Relief washed over Alex so strongly that his knees felt weak. Yes, that works. Thank you so much." "Not a problem," Mr. Henderson said. "I'll see you then." Alex ended the call and stood there for a moment, his phone still clutched in his hand. He had done it. He had taken the first step toward selling his bike, his pride, his freedom. The reality of what he was about to do settled over him like a heavy blanket. He took a deep breath, pushed himself off the wall, and went back into his mother's room. The nurse was adjusting one of the IV bags when he entered. She gave him a kind smile. "How are you holding up?" "I'm okay," Alex lied, his gaze fixed on his mother. "I need to go out for a little while. To make a phone call and take care of something," the nurse nodded understandingly. "That's fine, dear. We'll take good care of her. Just make sure you're back before visiting hours end at 10. "I will," Alex promised. He approached the bed and gently took his mother's hand again. It felt a little warmer this time, or maybe that was just his imagination. "I'm going to go for a little while, Mom," he whispered. "But I'll be back soon. I'm going to fix this. I promise." He stood there for a moment longer, memorizing the lines of her face, the way her hair spread across the pillow, the soft sound of her breathing. Then with a final squeeze of her hand, he turned and left the room, his resolve hardening with each step he took away from her. The drive home felt surreal. The streets were bathed in the orange glow of streetlights, and the world seemed to be moving in slow motion. Alex kept replaying the conversation with Mr. Henderson in his mind, wondering if he was doing the right thing. The bike was his escape, his joy, the one thing in his life that was truly his. But his mother was his life. There was no choice to be made. When he arrived home, the house was dark and empty. It felt strange to be there without his mother, without the familiar sounds of her moving around in the kitchen, or the soft glow of the television in the living room. The silence was oppressive, a constant reminder of what was at stake. Alex went straight to the garage. The bike was still there, leaning against the wall where he'd left it that morning. In the dim light of the single bare bulb, it looked less vibrant, more like just an object rather than the symbol of freedom it had become. He ran his hand along the frame, feeling the familiar contours beneath his fingers. He remembered the day he'd brought it home, the pride he'd felt, the dreams he'd had of all the places they would go together. With a heavy heart, Alex opened the garage door and wheeled the bike out into the cool night air. He didn't bother to put it on the car rack. Instead, he carefully laid it on the back seat, arranging it so it wouldn't get scratched. As he closed the door, he caught his reflection in the window. a tired, worried-looking teenager with the weight of the world on his shoulders. He looked away quickly, not wanting to see himself like that. The park was mostly empty when he arrived, save for a few teenagers hanging out near the playground and a couple walking their dog. Alex found a parking spot under a large oak tree and got out of the car, his movements slow and deliberate. He took the bike from the back seat, his hands lingering on the handlebars for a moment before he wheeled it toward the picnic area where he'd first met Mr. Henderson. The man was already there, sitting on one of the wooden benches. He stood up when he saw Alex approaching, a friendly smile on his face. Even in the dim light, Alex could see that he was well dressed, wearing a collared shirt and nice slacks that seemed out of place in the casual setting of the park. "You made it," Mr. Henderson said, his eyes immediately going to the bike. "And you brought her with you? Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful." "She's a good bike," Alex said, his voice tight with emotion. Mr. Henderson circled the bike slowly, his expert eyes taking in every detail. "Excellent condition. You've taken good care of her. These custom components, they're top of the line. You have a good eye for quality." "My dad taught me a lot about bikes before he left," Alex said, then immediately regretted bringing up his father. It felt too personal, too revealing. Mr. Henderson seemed to sense his discomfort. "He taught you well. This is a special bike, a real gem," so he said, turning his attention back to Alex. "How much are you asking for her?" Alex had thought about this on the drive over. He knew the bike was worth more than what he'd paid for it, especially with the upgrades he'd added, but he also knew he was in a vulnerable position, that he needed the money quickly. He decided to aim high, knowing they could negotiate from there. $4,000, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. Mr. Henderson raised his eyebrows. "That's quite a price. Don't get me wrong, she's worth it, but that's a significant amount of money for a bicycle." "I know," Alex said, his gaze dropping to the ground. "But I need the money. It's important." The man studied him for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "You said it was an emergency earlier. If you don't mind my asking, what kind of trouble are you in?" Alex hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. He didn't want this stranger's pity, but he also wanted him to understand why he was selling something so clearly precious to him. "It's my mom," he said finally, his voice barely audible. "She's in the hospital. She had a heart attack and she needs surgery. The hospital needs $5,000 up front before they'll do it." Mr. Henderson's friendly demeanor vanished, replaced by a look of genuine concern. "Oh my, that's terrible. I'm so sorry to hear that. How old is she?" 48, Alex replied, his eyes stinging with unshed tears. "She works 2 jobs to take care of us. She doesn't have anyone else." The man was quiet for a long time, just looking at Alex with an expression Alex couldn't quite read. Finally, he nodded, as if coming to a decision. $4,000 is a fair price for this bike, he said, his voice firm. "But given your circumstances, I'll give you $5,000. That should cover what you need for the hospital, right?" Alex's head snapped up, his eyes wide with disbelief. $5,000? But why? You don't have to do that. Mr. Henderson smiled, but it was a sad, gentle smile. "I had a son once," he said quietly. "He was about your age when he got sick. We had good insurance, but there were still expenses. Things the insurance wouldn't cover. I had to sell his baseball card collection. He'd been building it since he was a little boy. It broke his heart, but it saved his life." He paused, his gaze distant, lost in memory. "He's grown now with a family of his own. He's healthy and happy, and that's all that matters. The baseball cards, they were just things. Things can be replaced. People can't." Alex felt a lump form in his throat. He hadn't expected this kindness, this understanding from a complete stranger. He'd been prepared to negotiate, to fight for every dollar, but instead, this man was offering him exactly what he needed. No questions asked. "I don't know what to say," Alex managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you. Thank you so much." "You don't have to say anything," Mr. Henderson replied, pulling out his wallet. "I don't have that much cash on me, but I can write you a check. Will that work? Or do you need cash for the hospital?" "A check should be fine," Alex said. "They'll accept a check." The man nodded and pulled out a checkbook and a pen. He leaned against the picnic table to write, his movements careful and deliberate. Alex stood there watching him, feeling a mix of gratitude and sadness. He was getting exactly what he needed, but the cost was higher than he could have ever imagined. Mr. Henderson tore the check from the book and held it out to Alex. Here you go. $5,000. I hope your mother gets well soon. Alex took the check, his fingers brushing against the man's. It felt official, final. He looked down at the piece of paper in his hand, at the neat handwriting and the string of zeros that represented his bike, his freedom, his pride. Thank you, Alex said again, his voice barely a whisper. I'll never forget this. Just take care of your mom, Mr. Henderson replied. That's all the thanks I need. The man walked over to the bike and ran his hand along the frame, much as Alex had done earlier. She's in good hands now, he said, more to himself than to Alex. I'll take good care of her. Alex watched as Mr. Henderson wheeled the bike away, its red frame disappearing into the darkness. He stood there for a long time after the man was gone, the check clutched in his hand, the night air suddenly feeling cold against his skin. He had done it. He had sold his bike to save his mother's life. But as he walked back to his car, the check feeling heavy in his pocket, he couldn't help but feel like he'd lost a part of himself in the process. The drive back to the hospital was the longest of Alex's life. The check felt like a brick in his pocket, heavy and foreign. Every time he stopped at a red light, his eyes would drift down to the passenger seat, to the empty space where the bike should have been. The car felt too big, too quiet without it. He kept reaching for the radio, then stopping himself as if music would be a betrayal of the sacrifice he had just made. The streetlights painted streaks across his windshield, but he barely saw them, his mind replaying the moment he had handed over the handlebars, the finality of Mr. Henderson's promise to take good care of her. He parked in the same spot as before, the hospital looming above him like a giant pale beast. The automatic doors whooshed open, welcoming him back into the world of antiseptic smells and hushed, worried voices. The waiting area was even more crowded now, a sea of anxious faces illuminated by the harsh fluorescent lights. Alex felt a strange detachment from it all, as if he was watching a movie rather than living his own life. He moved through the crowd, his feet knowing the path to the emergency department desk even as his mind felt numb and distant. The same receptionist was there, her expression tired but kind. Back again? She asked, recognizing him. Alex just nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He pointed down the corridor toward Dr. Evans' office. She's with a patient right now, the receptionist said gently, but she told me to send you straight to your mother's room if you came back. She said it was important. Important. The word hung in the air. Everything was important now. Every minute, every decision. Alex gave a jerky nod of thanks and walked the familiar route to the room with the glass walls. As he approached, he saw Dr. Evans was indeed there, standing by his mother's bed and talking to another nurse. They both looked up as he entered, their expressions serious. Alex, Dr. Evans said, her voice low. I was just about to call you. There's been a change. Alex's heart stopped. A change? Is she worse? The doctor gestured for him to come closer. No, not worse. But her condition is still precarious. The tests we ran show more extensive blockages than we initially thought. The bypass surgery is even more critical now. We need to schedule it for first thing in the morning. Alex felt a wave of dizziness and put a hand on the footboard of the bed to steady himself. Okay, he said, his voice sounding distant to his own ears. Okay, first thing in the morning. Dr. Evans studied his face, her eyes softening with a look that was almost pity. Alex, about the payment. The hospital administration is firm. We can't book the operating room without proof of payment. I'm sorry. Alex reached into his pocket, his fingers closing around the folded piece of paper. He pulled it out, his hand trembling slightly as he held it out to her. I have it, he said, the words feeling heavy on his tongue. I have the money. Dr. Evans took the check, her eyes widening slightly as she looked at the amount. She looked from the check to Alex's face, a question in her eyes, but she didn't ask. She simply nodded, a gesture of professional respect mixed with something else, something warmer. I'll take this to the billing department right now. They'll get the paperwork started. The surgery is scheduled for 7 a.m. You should go home and get some rest. You'll want to be here when she comes out of recovery. Alex shook his head. I'm not leaving. Alex, the doctor said, her tone gentle but firm. There's nothing you can do here tonight. She won't even know you're here. You need to take care of yourself. I'll sleep here, he said, his voice cracking. In the chair. I'm not leaving her. Dr. Evans looked at him for a long moment, then at his mother's still form on the bed. She seemed to understand something without him having to say it. "All right," she said softly. "I'll have a nurse bring you a blanket and a pillow, but try to rest. Tomorrow will be a long day." After she left, Alex pulled the chair closer to the bed and sat down, taking his mother's hand in his. It felt even cooler now, and he rubbed it gently, trying to infuse some warmth into it. He looked at her face, peaceful in her sedated state, and felt a fresh wave of guilt wash over him. He had sold his freedom for her, but what if it wasn't enough? What if the surgery didn't work? What if he had given up the one thing that brought him joy for nothing? He sat there in the dim light, the rhythmic beeping of the monitor a constant reminder of the fragile life hanging in the balance. He thought about Mr. Henderson, about the man's story of his own son. He wondered if the man's son had ever felt this same crushing weight of responsibility, this same aching sense of loss. He thought about the bike, about the wind on his face and the feeling of flying down a trail, and he had to bite his lip to keep from crying out. A nurse came in with a thin blanket and a flimsy pillow, giving him a sympathetic smile as she handed them to him. "Try to get some sleep," she whispered. But sleep was impossible. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the red frame of his bike disappearing into the darkness. He saw the worry lines on his mother's face. He saw the 5 zeros on the check that now belonged to the hospital. The night stretched on, an endless cycle of beeping machines and whispered conversations in the hallway. Alex dozed off once or twice, jerking awake with a start each time, his heart racing until he remembered where he was and why. The first gray light of dawn was just beginning to filter through the window when Dr. Evans returned, her expression alert and focused. "It's time," she said. "They're coming to take her to the operating room. You can walk with us, but you'll have to wait here after that." Alex stood up, his body stiff and sore from sleeping in the chair. He squeezed his mother's hand one last time. "I'll be right here, Mom," he whispered, knowing she couldn't hear him but needing to say it anyway. "I'll be waiting for you." A team of orderlies came in with a rolling gurney, and with practiced efficiency, they transferred his mother from the bed, carefully moving the tubes and wires that connected her to the machines. Alex walked beside them as they pushed her down the corridor, his hand resting on her arm. The hospital was just beginning to wake up, the sounds of the night shift giving way to the bustle of the day. They reached a set of large double doors with a sign that read, "Operating Room, Authorized Personnel Only." "This is as far as you can go," Dr. Evans said, putting a hand on his shoulder. "The surgery will take several hours. There's a waiting room down the hall. The receptionist there knows to keep you updated." Alex watched as the door swung shut behind his mother, cutting her off from his view. He stood there for a long time, just staring at the closed doors, feeling more alone than he had ever felt in his life. The corridor seemed to stretch out endlessly in both directions, a sterile, white tunnel with no end in sight. He found the waiting room the doctor had mentioned, a small, sterile space with uncomfortable-looking chairs and a coffee machine in the corner. There were a few other people there, all with the same strained, worried expressions he had seen on his own face in the car window. He chose a chair in the far corner, away from the others, and tried to make himself as small as possible. The hours that followed were the slowest of Alex's life. He watched the hands of the clock on the wall crawl around the dial, each minute feeling like an hour. He tried to read a magazine, but the words swam before his eyes, meaningless jumbles of letters. He drank a cup of coffee from the machine, but it was bitter and burnt, and it did nothing to ease the knot of anxiety in his stomach. He thought about calling his friends, about telling them what was happening, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. He didn't want their pity or their awkward attempts to comfort him. This was his burden to carry, his sacrifice to bear. He had made his choice, and now he had to live with the consequences, whatever they might be. As the morning wore on, the waiting room filled up and then emptied out again, a constant stream of people coming and going with their own private dramas and emergencies. Alex remained in his corner, a silent, unmoving statue of worry. He thought about his mother, about all the times she had been there for him, all the sacrifices she had made for him. He thought about the future, a future that suddenly seemed terrifyingly uncertain. And he thought about the bike, not with the sharp pain of loss he had felt earlier, but with a dull, aching sense of nostalgia, like remembering a dream that was slowly fading away. It was early afternoon when a nurse finally came into the waiting room, looking around until her eyes found his. "Alex," she called, and he was on his feet before she could say anything else. "She's out of surgery," the nurse said, and Alex felt his knees go weak with relief. The doctor will be out in a few minutes to talk to you, but I wanted to let you know that it went well. She's in recovery now. Alex sank back into his chair, the relief so overwhelming it was almost painful. He put his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs he hadn't realized were building inside him. It was over. The waiting, the worrying, the terrible decision. It was all over. A few minutes later, Dr. Evans came in, her expression tired but satisfied. She sat down next to him, her presence calm and reassuring. The surgery was a success, she said, and the words were like music to Alex's ears. It was a long procedure, and we had to do 4 bypasses, which is more than we expected, but everything went smoothly. Her heart is strong and she's responding well. She'll be in the intensive care unit for a day or 2, and then we'll move her to a regular room. With proper care and medication, she should make a full recovery. Alex listened, his mind trying to process the words. Full recovery. It was a phrase he hadn't dared to hope for, a future he hadn't allowed himself to imagine. Can I see her? He asked, his voice hoarse. Not yet, Dr. Evans said gently. She needs time to wake up from the anesthesia, and the ICU has restricted visiting hours. But you can see her this evening. In the meantime, you should go home. Get a real meal, take a shower, get some sleep in a real bed. You'll be no good to her if you collapse from exhaustion. Alex wanted to argue, to insist on staying, but he was too tired, too drained to put up a fight. He just nodded, his body feeling heavy and boneless. Thank you, he said, looking up at the doctor. For everything. Dr. Evans smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached her eyes. You're a good son, Alex. Your mother is lucky to have you. As he walked out of the hospital and into the bright afternoon sun, Alex felt a strange mix of emotions. He was exhausted, relieved, and deeply, profoundly sad. He had done what he had to do, he had saved his mother's life, but in the process he had lost a part of himself. He had sold his bike, his freedom, his joy, and he knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones that nothing would ever be the same again. The house felt wrong when Alex walked through the door. It was too quiet, too still. For 17 years he had come home to the sound of his mother moving around, to the smell of something cooking on the stove, to the feeling of warmth and life that she brought to every room. Now there was nothing, just silence and emptiness. He stood in the entryway for a long time, his backpack slung over one shoulder, not sure what to do next. Dr. Evans had been right, he was exhausted, every part of him aching with a weariness that went deeper than his muscles and bones. But the thought of sleeping in his own bed, in his own empty house, felt more overwhelming than staying awake in the uncomfortable hospital chair. He dropped his backpack by the door and walked into the kitchen. The dishes from his breakfast were still in the sink, the note from his mother still on the counter where he had left it that morning. Have a good day at school. Love you, Mom. He picked it up, the familiar handwriting making his chest ache. It felt like it had been written a lifetime ago, by a different person in a different world. He opened the refrigerator, not because he was hungry, but because it was something to do, something normal. The light cast a sad yellow glow on the contents. Half a carton of milk, some leftovers in a plastic container, a few pieces of fruit. It was a testament to his mother's careful budgeting, to her ability to make something out of almost nothing. He closed the door, his appetite gone. He wandered into the living room, his eyes landing on the armchair where his mother so often fell asleep. He could almost see her there, her head tilted to one side, her breathing soft and even. He reached out and touched the worn fabric of the chair, as if he could somehow absorb some of her warmth, some of her strength. It was then that he noticed the small stack of bills on the coffee table, neatly organized with a paperweight on top. His mother was always so organized, so on top of things, even when she was exhausted. He picked up the top one, a credit card statement, and felt a fresh wave of guilt wash over him. The balance was higher than he would have guessed, a reminder of the constant financial pressure she was under. He had been so focused on his own wants, his own dreams, that he had failed to see how much she was struggling. He put the bills down, unable to look at them anymore, and walked toward his bedroom. He had to pass the garage door on the way, and he found himself stopping, his hand reaching for the handle before he stopped himself. He couldn't go in there. He couldn't face the empty space where his bike used to be. It was too soon, the wound too fresh. Instead, he went into his room and collapsed onto his bed, not even bothering to take off his shoes. He stared at the ceiling, at the glow-in-the-dark stars he had stuck there when he was 10, at the poster of the mountain bike he had torn from the magazine and tacked to the wall. It seemed like a cruel joke now, a reminder of what he had lost. He closed his eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. His mind was a whirlwind of images and emotions. His mother's pale face in the hospital bed, the steady beep of the heart monitor, the red frame of his bike disappearing into the darkness, the 5 zeros on the check he had handed to the hospital. He felt a familiar ache in his chest, a mix of grief and regret so powerful it was hard to breathe. He must have dozed off at some point, because the next thing he knew, the room was dark, and his phone was buzzing on the nightstand. He fumbled for it, his heart racing until he saw the hospital's number on the screen. "Hello?" he said, his voice thick with sleep. "Alex? It's Dr. Evans. I'm sorry to call so late, but I thought you'd want to know that your mother is awake. She's asking for you." Alex sat up so quickly he almost fell out of bed. "She's awake? Is she okay? Can I talk to her?" "She's still a bit groggy from the anesthesia, and she has a breathing tube in so she can't talk," the doctor explained. "But she's coherent and her vitals are strong. You can come see her if you'd like." "I'm on my way," Alex said, already pulling on his shoes. The drive to the hospital was different this time. The darkness outside felt less oppressive, more like a blanket than a weight. The streets were empty, the world quiet and still. For the first time in days, Alex felt a glimmer of hope, a small spark of light in the darkness that had enveloped him. The intensive care unit was a different world from the rest of the hospital. It was quieter, more controlled, with a hushed, reverent atmosphere that spoke of the fragility of life. A nurse led him to his mother's room, a small space filled with machines and monitors, all beeping and whirring in a soft, rhythmic chorus. His mother was lying in the bed, her eyes open and fixed on the door as he entered. She looked pale and tired, but she was awake. She was alive. Alex approached the bed slowly, his heart pounding with a mixture of joy and apprehension. He took her hand, careful not to disturb the IV line taped to her arm. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm here." Her eyes found his, and in their depths he saw a universe of emotion. Love, relief, confusion, fear. She squeezed his hand, a weak but deliberate gesture that spoke volumes. "You had surgery," he said, knowing she couldn't respond but needing to fill the silence, to explain what had happened. "You had a heart attack, Mom, but you're going to be okay. The doctor said the surgery went well and you're going to be okay." He saw a tear escape from the corner of her eye and trace a path down her temple. He gently wiped it away with his thumb, his own eyes stinging with unshed tears. "Don't cry," he said, his voice cracking. "Everything's going to be fine now. I promise." He sat with her for a long time, just holding her hand and talking to her, telling her about the hospital, about the doctors and nurses, about how much he loved her. He didn't mention the bike, didn't mention the sacrifice he had made. That was a burden he would carry alone, a secret he would keep to protect her from the guilt of knowing what he had given up to save her. Over the next few days, a routine began to form. Alex would go to the hospital in the morning, stay until visiting hours were over, then go home to an empty house and a restless night's sleep. His mother's condition improved steadily. The breathing tube was removed and she was able to speak, her voice weak and raspy at first, then growing stronger with each passing day. She moved from the intensive care unit to a regular room, a sun-filled space with a window overlooking the hospital garden. Alex would bring her books to read and magazines to flip through, and they would sit together in comfortable silence, the unspoken understanding between them a bond stronger than words. One afternoon, as she was picking at a tray of hospital food, she looked at him, her expression serious. "The nurse told me about the payment," she said, her voice still a little hoarse. "She said you paid the deductible before they would do the surgery." Alex felt his stomach clench. He had been dreading this conversation, hoping to avoid it altogether. "I had some savings," he said, trying to sound casual. "From my job." His mother studied his face, her eyes searching his. "How much, Alex? How much did it cost?" He looked down at his hands, unable to meet her gaze. $5,000. He heard her sharp intake of breath, felt the weight of her shock and dismay. 5,000, but that's all you had saved for college. All that money you worked so hard for. "It doesn't matter," he said quickly. "College can wait. Your health is more important." "But your future," she protested, her voice thick with emotion. Your dreams. You're my dream, Mom, he said, the words coming out before he could stop them. You're all I've ever had. I'd sell everything I own to keep you safe. I'd do anything. Tears filled her eyes and she reached out to take his hand, her grip surprisingly strong. Oh, Alex, my sweet, sweet boy. What did I do to deserve you? Alex felt his own eyes welling up, and he blinked back the tears, not wanting to break down in front of her. You loved me, he said simply. That's all. A week later, his mother was discharged from the hospital. The doctor gave them a long list of instructions, medications to take, foods to avoid, activities to limit. But the most important instruction was to take it easy, to rest, to let her body heal. Coming home was strange. The house that had felt so empty and wrong now felt full and right, filled with his mother's presence. Alex helped her settle into her favorite armchair, bringing her a blanket and a cup of tea, hovering over her like a mother hen. I'm fine, Alex, she said, swatting him away playfully. Stop fussing over me. I just want to make sure you're comfortable, he said, adjusting the blanket for the third time. I am, she assured him, her eyes soft with affection. Now, why don't you go for a ride? It's a beautiful day and you've been cooped up in that hospital for a week. You could use some fresh air. Alex froze, his hand still on the blanket. A ride. The word hung in the air between them, a reminder of everything he had lost, everything he had sacrificed. I don't have a bike anymore, Mom, he said, his voice quiet. His mother looked at him, her expression confused. What do you mean? Of course you do. It's in the garage. Alex took a deep breath, steeling himself for the conversation he had been dreading. No, it's not. I sold it. He watched as the realization dawned on her as the pieces of the puzzle clicked into place in her mind. The $5,000, the college fund, the sacrifice he had made. Her eyes widened in horror, her hand flying to her mouth. You sold your bike? She whispered, her voice filled with disbelief and dismay. The bike you loved? The bike you worked for 2 years to buy? You sold it to pay for my surgery? Alex nodded, unable to speak, his throat tight with emotion. Oh, Alex, she said, tears streaming down her face. No, you shouldn't have done that. I can't let you do that. We'll find another way. We'll figure something out. There is no other way, Mom, he said, his voice cracking. And it's okay. It was just a thing, a bike. You're more important than any bike. But your dreams, she protested again, the words catching in her throat. You're my dream, he repeated, the words feeling more true now than they had before. You're alive and you're here, and that's all that matters. We can figure out the rest together. He reached out and took her hand, the same hand he had held in the hospital, the same hand that had guided him through his life. She squeezed it tightly, her tears falling onto their joined hands. I love you, Alex, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I love you so much. I love you too, Mom, he replied, his own tears finally breaking free. More than anything. They sat there for a long time, just holding hands and crying, releasing all the fear and pain and worry of the past few weeks. It was a catharsis, a cleansing of the soul, a moment of pure, unadulterated love and connection. When the tears subsided, Alex's mother looked at him, her expression serious but gentle. We'll get you a new bike, she said, her voice firm with resolve. Maybe not right away, but we will. I'll get a second job when I'm feeling better. We'll save up together. We'll get you a new bike. Alex smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached his eyes. Okay, Mom, he said. We'll get a new bike. But even as he said the words, he knew it wouldn't be the same. The new bike would be just a bike, a means of transportation, a piece of metal and rubber. The old bike, the one he had sold, was something more. It was a symbol of his youth, his independence, his dreams. It was a sacrifice he had made for the person he loved most in the world. A testament to the depth of his devotion. And as he sat there with his mother, her hand still in his, he knew that he had lost something precious, something he could never get back. But he had gained something too. A deeper understanding of love, a stronger bond with his mother, a newfound appreciation for the fragile, beautiful, complicated thing called life. He had sold his bike to save his mother's life, and in the end, it was a trade he would make again, 1,000 times over, without a moment's hesitation.